Greetings. I'm back with some more book recommendations. 3 of the 4 that I'm going to recommend this evening, I recommended to the travelers who went with us on a tour of England in last September 2024. And I did a little crowdcast recommending some resources in preparation for that trip. And 3 of these books I recommended for those people. If you watched that, this will be familiar to you. If you didn't, I thought I'd replay them here. And then I'm going to add one more book that I picked up over in England on that trip. This trip was for mostly centered around the history of evangelicalism, English-speaking evangelicalism in England and how it impacted the United States. So all these kind of circle around that. The first one that I'm going to recommend is called George Mueller. He Dared to Trust God for the Needs of Countless Orphans. George Mueller by Faith Cox Bailey. This is just a really short one. It's 157 quick pages. My sister gave me this book many years ago when I was a little kid, and I read it then and I loved it, and I always admired George Mueller. And in preparation for, or in thinking about going to England, I thought, boy, it'd be wonderful to go see the orphanage that George Mueller and his wife started. George Mueller this is in the 1800s, across the span of the 1800s. He began as a pastor, normal pastor, but he decided to, a paid pastor, but he decided because his congregation was poor that he would just trust the Lord for his pay. So he told his congregation, I'm not going to take a salary, just whatever you can afford to give, that's what we'll live on. And people thought he was crazy, but it worked. It worked in the sense that he always had enough. He started various ministries in the community, the same basis. We're not asking anybody for money. We're just going to pray to the Lord, and the Lord will provide it. Eventually, he and his wife started an orphanage that ended up serving thousands and thousands of people, of little kids. And he never once asked for money. When they needed something, they just prayed, and God miraculously provided. And this book is full of those stories. It's a great book, short one, really easy to read. The next one is about the Inklings. The Inklings were a group of 24 maybe men and a few women who were associated with the most famous Inklings were J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. They're the main ones, the ones who sort of ran the Inklings. It also is about Owen Barfield and Charles Williams, who were 2 longtime members of the Inklings. The other folks kind of came and went a little bit, but these are the 4 main ones, and the ones that are most well known are C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien. And you can go to Oxford University where they met like 2 or 3 times a week sometimes, and they just talked about stuff. They talked about their books, their writings, their poetry, they talked about their classes, they talked about ideas, they talked about storytelling, about Christianity, and they're just an amazing group of people. And this is a very good book. It's by Philip Zaleski and Carol Zaleski, Zaleski. Philip and Carol Zaleski. These are 2 English professors, so I wouldn't say that this is the easiest book to read, but it's not bad. They write beautifully because they're English professors, and they don't really write for an academic audience, more of like an intelligent public audience, and so it's pretty accessible. They are English, and so it focuses a little bit on the literature that these men wrote. They include enough other biographical stuff so that if you're not into literary stuff, it's still very interesting. I kind of skimmed several sections where they got way too into like literary criticism and that sort of thing. But otherwise, I really enjoyed it, and I highly recommend it. When I came home, or I should say after I read this, I was like, I really want to start like an Inklings here in Washington, which I haven't done. Okay, the next one is about C.S. Lewis, probably the most famous, with J.R.R. Tolkien, the most famous of the Inklings group. This is by Alistair McGrath, M-C-G-R-A-T-H. C.S. Lewis, A Life, Eccentric Genius, Reluctant Prophet. Alistair McGrath is a really excellent historian. He writes about the history of theology, the history of philosophy. He also does apologetics, really solid apologetics. When I got this book, I wanted a book I could really trust on C.S. Lewis. And so when I saw that Alistair McGrath had written a biography of him, I'm like, oh, I'm going to get that. I was a little bit nervous that it would be super deep, because Alistair McGrath writes really heavy-duty scholarly works. Turns out he's one of these rare people who can publish an incredibly deep, almost esoteric kind of scholarly work, and then turn around and write a book for the public audience. And so this is the public audience book, and it is really good. He's an excellent historian and writes really well. The last book I'm going to recommend is about somebody who I had come across at different times when I was studying 18th century evangelicalism, especially George Whitefield. The man's name is John Kennick, and I've seen his name mentioned, but I didn't really know anything about him. And I was, I think, at a John Wesley site in England in September with this tour group, and one of my good friends saw me looking this book over. I was looking at it, I'm like, I don't know, should I get it, should I not, do I have time? I don't know if I should get it or not. And he came over and he like grabbed the book out of my hands, and he went over to the counter and bought it for me and gave it to me as a gift. And so I started it in the airport on the way home from England, and I finished it in the 8-hour flight from England to the United States. That's how good it was. It's 422 pages, but they're not real dense pages, and it's really well written. I should show it to you. It's called John Kennick, the Forgotten Evangelist, the story of the first Methodist lay preacher who became the Apostle of Northern Ireland. It's by G.M. Best. John Kennick. It looks like maybe Sennick, but the author claims that you pronounce it actually Kennick. Amazing individual. Absolutely amazing. Died young because of his tireless, zealous service of the Lord, traveling around, starting churches, pastoring churches, preaching to people. Just an amazing evangelist. Somebody that, as I read, I was just really inspired and a bit challenged by. I think you'll enjoy that book. I think you'll enjoy all 4 of these books. If you want an easy book, the George Mueller one is very easy. If you're willing to dig a little bit deeper, these other 3 are just really good books on the history of evangelicalism. So I hope you read them, and I hope you enjoy them.